You know, there's an why is the clock not running? Oh, there it goes. Sorry. Equipment's being a little finicky today. There's an ancient Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." And this is a curse because interesting times are often the most horrifying. And I can't help but feel right now that we are living in interesting times. So perhaps it might be lucrative to distract ourselves just a little bit. Assignment 2 is going to focus with turning outward. The oppression assignment, which I'm excited about grading over the next few days, was very inward. We reflected upon our own experiences, right? And these experiences were often very mental, very visceral. They meant a lot to us, and they were personal stories. But where we need to turn now, and this is where writing really starts to improve, we get in touch with our inner self, our inner voice, through exploration of our emotions, exploration of the things that we experience in our lives that make us who we are. But it's important to begin to engage with the outside world as well. The outside requires us to be descriptive. And the thing that's going to absolutely motivate this next assignment is description. Now, description is one of the modes of writing. I'm going to get theoretical here because when I get stressed out, when I get worried, I love theory. Not very many people follow me on this ledge, but I really like philosophy. And so when I am pensive or, worried, I start thinking about philosophical, deep things. The modes of discourse are the things that we use to communicate in writing, and they're extremely specific. Narration is story. Your oppression assignment was primarily narrative in the sense that we were telling our own stories of oppression. But what we're going to do next is we're going to focus on the outside, and we're going to work more with description. Now, one of the things I love to do in my classes, when they're face-to-face classes, is to talk about definitions as well, which coincidentally is another mode, but we'll come to that some other time. Defining words is something that is extremely useful, but most people never stop to really think about the definition of a word because a lot of us have an attitude towards word definitions that's very set in stone. We think that word means what it means, and there's not a lot of complexity to it, right? But in actuality, the way that we define words shapes our worldview and can very easily shape who we are. And what you'll find is that the more you think about word definitions, the more you find that they're actually a little bit more bendable than you might initially think. So let's look at the word description. How do you define description? Now, I'm not going to get into all the weird philosophical tidbits, but there's a lot of bad definitions of description, a lot of shallow ones, or even tautological ones. Like every time I ask this question to a class, somebody's like, well, you describe something. Well, yeah, but you just use the word in its own definition. That's in philosophy called a tautology. Don't worry, I'm going to get past this garbage in a minute. But you can't just simply define a word by saying itself. You undermine the entire definition. To define description, the way I like to think about it, is words that evoke sensory details. That is the essence of description to me. So there are words, they are phrases, sentences, writing that evokes sound, touch, taste, smell. All of those things are essential in a description. There are a lot of ways that we can elicit this type of writing. Whether I had a colleague one time who had an assignment where the entire class had to write a 4-page description of a baseball. And I asked him, why do you hate your students so much that you would make them do that? Why do you hate yourself so much that you would force yourself to grade over 100 papers describing a baseball? There are good ways to do this, and there are bad ways to do this. For us, I'm going to give you a couple of pathways of writing me a good, solid description. Today, we're going to talk about the first. Let's talk about eco-narrative. Eco-narrative is essentially the story of a place. Now, you'll notice this is all about description, but I'm using a narrative. When we teach the modes of discourse, the types of writing, a good teacher is going to mix these things up a little bit. Writing a pure description is really weird. Why would you ever just describe something if you're not trying to put it in some type of context or trying to use it in some way? So essentially, we're going to mix narrative and description together in a story of a place. Now, the lockdown and COVID-19 makes this slightly more difficult than it might otherwise would have been. But don't worry, there are alternatives. This is just the first initial idea. Again, I could get into layers and layers and layers of philosophy about the eco-narrative, where it comes from and what the idea of it is supposed to be. And I'll try to give you a very shortened version. When humans arrive at a piece of land, whether it be a new continent or anywhere, land forever becomes landscape. And landscape is land that has a story attached to it. We have a kind of weird instinct of the difference between land and landscape. Now, the funny thing is, this is, again, I'm getting really, really stupidly philosophical here, but just bear with me for a minute. Land is something that most humans never experience. Think about it like this. How many times have you gone to a place that no other human being has ever gone before? More than likely, you've never done that. I've never done that. And I've been in a lot of woods in my life. But I know that I've never set foot somewhere other people have not been. It's always a place that has been occupied. Now, this is kind of interesting because we have this innate drive to explore. We want to experience land that has never, ever been set foot on. And that's something most of us will never get to experience. Now, there's only a few places on planet Earth right now that would even qualify. There are places under the ocean no human has ever gone before. The moon has even at least been visited, but there's not many places that we have seen. Places that don't have many people are an interesting kind of byproduct of this. Now, I know that you're probably wondering where we're going with this. Just trust me for a minute. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. Think about it like this. When humans don't go to a place for a long time and it becomes abandoned or completely devoid of human activity, it gets something kind of weirdly special about it. I call this eeriness. Some people call it being haunted. The reason that we have haunted locations, and this is kind of one of those things that gets me into a little bit of trouble occasionally, but I'm going to say it because I believe it. I don't really believe in ghosts. There are times where I want to believe in ghosts, but I don't. A haunted location has that mystique to it because we've lost the story that place has. Haunted locations are almost always places with a kind of obscure or strange, inaccessible history, whether it be an abandoned hospital, an abandoned factory, a house where a murder occurred, or mysterious stuff where we know something happened there, but we don't really have access to it. That's what makes a haunting, right? Essentially, the story of the place, this is bugging me. The story of the place has collapsed into something similar to what we would have with land. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a haunted house or anything like that. Mount Everest has this. People line up to try to climb Mount Everest. This is an extremely dangerous place, right? An inhospitable place. It would be torturous to climb Mount Everest, and yet people line up like, yeah, let's go. Going to the moon is one of the most dangerous things human beings can ever strive for. Yet there are plenty of people who go, and it's considered this grand mystical thing, for us to return to the moon. But why? Why does anyone want to put themselves in that much danger? That's how strong the craving for this is. Like, did you guys know there are still bodies up on Mount Everest? Like, they even use them like for directions, I bet. Like, first you're going to want to step over Paul, and then you're going to want to make a right turn at Stanley. I mean, like the path is littered with the dead who didn't make it. Like, I shouldn't laugh at this, but, you know, human nature is really, really weird, right? So we all have this innate sense that we're seeking for the place with the mysterious story. We want to find it. Now, this assignment wants you to go to a place and write your story about it. You can do this in a number of ways, and you don't have to strive for any sort of eeriness. You don't have to strive even to find anything remotely resembling land. Landscape is just as interesting to me than land is, although, man, land, woo. Wouldn't it be cool to go somewhere that you know no one else has ever been to? Let me give you some examples. And honestly, this is very much going to be a drafted process, just like what we did earlier. Think about, I don't want to use any company names because I don't want them to get angry at some of the descriptions I might come up with. Think of your local supermarket. There are all sorts of different supermarkets you can plug into this blank. There are many of them. But think about your local supermarket. We go to a supermarket, and oftentimes we're so focused on what we're doing that we don't really stop and take in our environment, the things that are going on there, the stuff that is appealing to us, the stuff that is trying to influence our behavior. That's kind of a shame, because when you stop and think about it, a supermarket is a really interesting place if you stop and look for what's going on. When you visit a supermarket and you open your eyes to what's around you, you can come up with some pretty interesting stories. And one of the things you'll notice first, I've actually written about this a couple of times myself. When you go to the local supermarket, one of the big ones, people have a tendency to sort of act like zombies. They wander from place to place. They get a blank expression on their eyes, right? They're almost zombified. A lot of people kind of sort of anesthetize themselves. They deaden their senses when they go to the supermarket for their weekly grocery trip or what have you. These places are horribly unpleasant, whether it be the long lines, whether it be the people that you're forced to be around, especially now, considering how much we want to avoid being around other people for many reasons. But open your eyes next time. What's it like to walk into one of these supermarkets? What does it smell like? What do you see? What are the colors? What are the sounds? What is the feel of a shopping cart or a piece of merchandise that you're picking up? The feel of the pound of hamburger meat, right? These comparisons, these experiences, when you get close enough to the details and the descriptions, all of a sudden, something incredibly mundane, such as a trip to the local supermarket, can become incredibly interesting because we have essentially deadened our senses to what's going on. And so when you stop and you really think about the color and the texture of the hamburger meat that you're buying to make Hamburger Helper for the 50th time, what the hell does that actually look like? What are the descriptions you can use to bring it to life? The clothes that the person in front of you is wearing. Have you guys ever stopped and looked at, I'm going to do it. Have you guys ever stopped at Walmart fashion? You could probably write a whole paper just on that. I know I've worn some absolutely horrific things to Walmart. I don't know what it is, but it's like going to some type of like gigantic family reunion, but you just don't want to impress. You have no desire to impress anyone in that location. Just stop and think about all these things for a minute. You could write a really good eco narrative, just like the experience of shopping at a local supermarket, going there, getting your pad and paper, and writing out the experiences as you walk through that store. You don't have to worry about wildly differentiating your writing from anyone else's either. Your experience is going to be your own. And for this writing, the so what, the point, is something that you don't necessarily have to worry about. Have you guys ever had an English teacher tell you, well, you need to make it interesting? and you look back at them about a piece of writing. You're supposed to make it interesting, and you ask, well, how do I make it interesting? And more than likely, that English teacher said something like, I don't know. How do you actually make something interesting? What goes into that? What is the process by which we take a piece of writing and make it something someone would want to read or someone would get enjoyment out of it? One of the easiest ways to do that, and it does require a lot of practice, and this is one of the things that brings us good writing. So often in English classes, we focus so much on looking at the adequacy of writing. Are you using your commas correctly? Did you capitalize that word right? Did you underline the book title? We focus so much on those things that we forget that we're actually supposed to try to make the writing better. How do you do that? This is one of those ways. Let me give you an example. Let me tell you a story. And I want you to pay attention to the details of the story. Number one, there was a man. He walked out of his house. He walked to the liquor store. He bought a bottle of Johnny Walker Red. He went home. That's a crappy story, isn't it? Now let's play a little bit and see what we can do to jazz this baby up. On 5th Street, there's a house that lists to the west. It leans because the foundation's crumbling. A man walks out the front door and it squeaks loudly as he pushes it open. He wears a tattered brown trench coat, a Trilby hat, and socks that go up to his knees, bright colors in an argyle pattern. As he walks, he mumbles to himself, usually numbers, as if he's trying to solve a math problem in his head. He carefully avoids the crack in the sidewalk, sometimes walking on his tiptoes. He stops in front of a local liquor store. In the front is a bright red neon sign. The Q is burned out of the neon sign, so it says Lior. He goes in and spends roughly 5 minutes in the store before he emerges with a bottle in a brown paper bag. Once again, he walks down the sidewalk, carefully tiptoeing between the cracks and mumbling numbers to himself. He arrives back at his home, which again is listing to one side on its crumbling foundation. He takes a deep breath and he sighs. He goes back into his house, opens the screen door, disappears inside as a storm brews coming in from the east. That's a crappy story too. Nothing happens about a dude going to buy some liquor. But I bet you listened a little more carefully to the second one. What's the difference? I just included a bunch of details about that man's journey, the specifics about his behavior, the things surrounding him, what things look like. I didn't even get into the smells, a little bit of texture, but for the most part, I just sprinkled in vision and mostly sight is what I played around with there. And yet those specifics take you from crappy story to, wow, what a crappy story, but I can't stop listening to it. That is one of the simplest ways that we turn something entertaining. The mundane details are weirdly captivating, right? Now, again, let me emphasize, you guys are not going to be able to do that today because I've been writing most of my life, and I'm still not particularly good at that. But that's the key. That's what turns your writing vivid. That's what makes it entertaining. When you were in school and you're like, Miss Schumann, how do I make my writing good? And she's like, underline the title of books, right? That's actually how you do it. Let's get some more ideas out there. We got supermarket. One of my favorite examples of this, and I actually got this one published, was a trip to the flea market. That one was fun for smells, not unpleasant smells either. I love me the smell of cooking bratwurst. I'm thinking more COVID-19, a park. Parks, a downtown area. Gosh, that's so nerdy, but it works so well. I'm getting a lot of emails today. What else? Your backyard. Think about your backyard in the early morning as opposed to the backyard at the evening or even the afternoon. The difference when weather is behaving differently. Even somewhere in your house, right? I had a student one time write an eco-narrative about his bathroom, and he did it in a real smart butt kind of way, like, oh, I'm going to rub on my bathroom. And I was like, this is really good. He talked about the grout He talked about the floor, the toothbrush, the mirror, the view outside his window. And all of a sudden he's like, I didn't realize my bathroom is so interesting. Again, these mundane places can be weirdly captivating. Now, one of the questions I often get from students in regard to this particular assignment also is, do I actually have to go to the place to write the eco-narrative about it? Not necessarily. You might want to have a vivid memory of the place so that you can access those details. But accessing and going to these places by memory is perfectly fine. And I think might be more appropriate considering the current world situation we have today. Here's another favorite question. Can I go to a place that isn't real? The way that I respond to this is, it's easier to do this assignment if you can actually go to the place, right? You can go and experience the place, look for the details, look for the small things, all the small things. Truth, Blink 182. But I have had people pull this off with fictional locations. My personal favorite, a couple semesters ago, someone wrote an eco-narrative about Bikini Bottom with SpongeBob. And it was really good. Like, I was shocked. I was like, it's like, I'm there. Like, you can do that too. The bridge of Star Destroyer from Star Wars. Hogwarts. I am not a Harry Potter fan, probably because I've spent a good portion of my life people going like, you look like Harry Potter. And I'm like, you are stupid. But that's why I grew my beard, to be a little less Harry Potter-ish. Anyway, so these are all the options to you for this assignment. Now, this video is getting about to the point where I usually cut these off. Here's what I want you to do for this week, and I'm going to give you some alternatives to this next time. I'll give you a little preview. Eco-narratives can work really well with video games. Video games lend themselves very well, but I would rather talk about in the next video, which will be posted on Thursday. For this week, I want you to go into the discussion board, and I think I'm gonna create a new discussion board for this assignment, and it's just going to be eco-narrative discussions. I'm writing this down so I keep myself accountable. And I want you guys to go in and discuss some places that you might travel to, whether mentally or physically. And like I said, I'm going to give you some addendums to this and some options for doing eco-narrative stuff. And I am going to throw at you a new grammatical exercise. That will come later as well. Tentative due date for this assignment. I wrote it down. Oh, Tuesday, June 16th. That's to give me time to catch up on my grading and space this out a little bit more. So you got some time before you have to decide and commit, but you are going to need for this week to go in and share some potential locations you might want to visit. This doesn't lock you down. This is just for discussion, just to get you some points in the presentation thing where I'm going and putting in points for participation. So go and discuss some possible places and look out for my next video about how to incorporate the video games. I might even have a couple of YouTube Let's Plays to give you some ideas. Ooh, fun. That's exciting. I like this assignment. It's a weird one. What's going to get you the A is the descriptive words, bringing it to life. So if I don't give you a good grade on this one, I'm going to grade this one harder because I want you to appeal to my senses. And for some of you, that's going to be a challenge. That's okay, though. We got revisions. We got resubmissions. So don't panic. Feel free to be terrible at this. For a lot of you guys, this one's going to be weird. This one's going to be uncomfortable, okay? That's all right. That's what we got to do. If we're going to grow, if we're going to improve, we've got to take risks, and we got to fall on our faces a bit. So go in the discussion forum, discuss what locations you might want to travel to, whether physically or mentally, and just start bandying this concept about. And on Thursday, we'll do some video game discussions in case my gamers out there would like to try that on for size. In any case, I cherish you all. Please be safe. The world's a little scary right now, so try to find something that will give you a little bit more positive headspace. That was a fun one.